lot of unknowing and questioning ourselves, questioning myself if I would be ready, if I would prove myself. A month and a half before this, I was a VCU student going about life, not a care in the world, till our reserve unit got activated and shipped overseas and plopped down in the desert.
A young man joins the Marine Reserves to be part of the American invasion of Kuwait and to find out what he's made of.
You've got to learn a little bit of criminality. You've got to know how to get to places and get out without being seen. It's easy for everybody to line up and walk across a field and go to a road and say that there's 5 trucks in the parking lot. It's completely different to have you and however many other guys you've got do that same thing without being seen and then report back what you saw.
And a former sniper and reconnaissance team leader tells us how he used the skills learned in recon to help a member of his squad, a young soldier born in Iraq, to make a quick, secretive visit to his ruined childhood home on the outskirts of the Battle of Mosul. Hello, welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation in Richmond, Virginia. Our first story, G-Day, was written by Donald Green. Donald rode into battle as a young Marine Reserve artilleryman. He describes the apprehensions on the eve of the invasion of Kuwait, the chaos of the opening assaults, and the sobering thrill of finally taking part in combat. Then our second story, Going Home, finds our author Charles Williamson leading an unapproved mission, dodging the raging Battle of Mosul, to let a recon team member visit his long-lost Iraqi home. Let's listen first to G-Day, performed by Foster Solomon. Then I'll talk with author Donald Green, whom I used to babysit.
I stirred and grumbled in my sleeping bag as the fire watch kicked at my feet. I was burrowed deep in the sand, still chilled despite wearing my uniform under my chemical protection suit. We had gone to Mission-Oriented Protective Posture Level 2, charcoal-lined oversuit and rubber over boots the night before. Saddam had threatened to use chemical warfare during the mother of all battles, and the battle was getting ready to start. In the dark, I kneeled in the cold sand to roll up my sleeping bag and shove my meager belongings into my pack. The stars in the incredibly clear desert sky provided enough light to work by. All around our gun position, my brothers packed their gear, broke out MRE meals, or wandered to the front of the truck to take a leak. A couple might have been praying. Throck pulled the hooks off his ears and gathered us around. "All right, boys, today is the day that the Wild Turkey Express earns our pay. Ammo truck will be here in 30 and we move out in 60. Do what you need to do to get ready." I poured water from a plastic jerry can into my canteen cup so I could get in one last shave. It would be pretty shitty to have beard stubble breaking the seal of my gas mask if we got hit with nerve or blister agent. Nothing like the bracing chill of almost frozen water on the face to wake up and start the day. I was tired, but wired. It's pretty hard to get a good night's sleep the night before a war starts. Shaving with that cold water combined with the adrenaline waves of excitement got me raring to go. I chucked my half-eaten MRE into my pack as the ammo trucks rolled into our position. An all-terrain forklift brought us a pallet of powder cylinders, a mix of 155 projectiles, and fuse cans. As the ammo team chief for Gun 5, the Wild Turkey Express, I made sure the rounds were loaded on our truck where we could get them easily at our first firing position. We then prepped our howitzer for travel, 4 of us heaving the pintle ring onto the truck's hitch. We rolled back the truck's thick canvas top to expose the bed and climbed aboard. 10 Marine reservists, ranging from 19 to 25 years old, several college students, a firefighter, 2 cops, a poultry salesman, and some blue collars, all bound to a brotherhood, about to get tested by fire. We were off to see the elephant. We were leaving our home for the past month, a spot in the desert with no one around but the occasional Bedouin goat herder and semi-regular mail and chow delivery from battalion. During that time, we'd conducted training movements and emplacements until our battery functioned as a well-oiled machine. We also had a lot of downtime. Scorpion fights were always fun and could add to the combat pay of the lucky owner of the victorious arachnid. Now, those days of waiting and wondering were over. As Shapiro fired up the big diesel, I climbed over Marines, ammo, and gear to make my way to a spot at the front of the bed and leaned out over the spare tire and cab, my M16 at the ready. Shapiro joined in the battery convoy, tear-assing across the desert. I clutched to my perch as the truck bounced and jostled along the rough terrain, half terrified of bouncing out and half exhilarated by the thoughts of where we were headed. My eyes watered from the sand, brisk wind, and diesel smoke. But I wouldn't have been anywhere else in the truck. I had the best seat and could see everything. The only thing that could have made it better would have been a ring mount for our Madus 50 cal machine gun that was wrapped in a tarp with all the other gear in the truck bed. Nearing the Kuwaiti border, the sun rose to reveal lines of tanks, AAVs, towed and self-propelled artillery pieces, Humvees, and trucks, all in a mad dash for the 2 narrow routes that engineers had blown through the border minefield. Still manning my spot over the cab, I couldn't help but imagine the frenetic strings of Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. Robert Duvall had nothing on us. The travel lanes narrowed and slowed to fit through the minefield breaches, as if a masochistic traffic engineer had designed the mother of all highway merge lanes. If the Iraqis had targeted this junction with their artillery, we would likely have steel and high explosives raining down on us at any minute. Shapiro brought our truck to a juddering stop. I turned to face my brothers in the back of the truck. Their looks were a mixture of fear, excitement, and just blank. No telling how I looked to them. I couldn't help myself. The sudden stop called it up from deep in my psyche. I hollered out to them in my best Slim Pickens voice, "Ah, hell! One of you boys better go back and get a shitload of dimes!" The lines of combat-ready Marine vehicles merged slowly but surely in stops and starts. As we crossed the border, everyone in our truck faced outboard, M16s at the ready. We crept along, passing over the defensive trench that the Iraqis had dug just inside the border. Rumor had it that after strafing and bombing runs by our flyboys, engineers had rolled up in armored bulldozers to fill in the trench line before we came up. How many dozens or hundreds of Iraqi soldiers were buried beneath our wheels? Moving into the minefield, stakes delineated the safe route that the engineers had blown through. MPs kept the lines moving and stood watch with their Humvee-mounted 50s ready to defend us in that fatal funnel. Apaches and Cobras patrolled overhead watching our proverbial 6. If Shapiro steered off course just a few feet beyond the marked lanes, we would likely hit a mine and, if lucky, be delayed from getting to the action while our truck or howitzer got repaired. If unlucky, well, it had been a good life, but mines that can stop an armored vehicle would shred an open 5-ton truck. Clearing the minefield, the rows of vehicles spread out, each moving toward its assigned objective or mission. Shapiro floored the gas and broke off with Gun 4, 2nd Platoon's Fire Direction Control Team and the XO's Humvee, our small group making up the battery advance party. As we raced across the desert, I kept my spot on the front of the bed, alert for any threat. We passed countless, still-smoking hulks of Iraqi tanks and equipment. Burnt corpses draped across the turrets and shrapnel-riddled bodies lay where they'd fallen in the sand. The coalition air forces had really prepped this section of the desert for us. As the sun rose and the morning wore on, we bounced across the roadless terrain. Our small advance party convoy and destroyed Iraqi equipment were violent rents to the otherwise tranquil, endlessly rolling dunes. We came to a ridge overlooking a wide, flat canyon. After jerking the truck around so our cannon pointed north, Shapiro jumped out of the cab yelling, "Yee-haw! Can't ride that bronc for free!" We bailed out of the truck, every man taking his position to manhandle the howitzer off the hitch and ready it to fire. My ammo team and I unloaded the projectiles and fuses from the truck to set them up on the right, while the powder team set up their canisters on the left. Throck got on the traverse sight while Gibby ran the aiming stakes to the front to help him lay the piece on the correct deflection. Bordelon and Ayler readied the breech for firing, and Eamon set the 50 on its tripod. Everyone moved rapidly with little to say. We all knew our jobs well. As we got everything set up and ready for a fire mission, the rest of the battery came in and started setting up. In the canyon below, dozens of Marine M60 tanks milled about, seemingly in random paths, as if searching every cranny. Directly across from our position, the canyon wall had a pass through it. Iraqi T-72 tanks roared through that pass into the canyon with our guys. There was nothing we could do but watch helplessly from high above. Artillery could not engage moving targets so close to friendly forces. We let out cheers as our fellow Marines lit up those enemy tanks. We had front row seats to an epic tank battle. Iraqi tanks threw treads, they burst into flames, turret machine gunners blasted Iraqi tankers who tried to flee on foot. Too far away to hear the blasts, we could only watch. Our tankers were winning, but tables could turn with a lucky shot or two. The Iraqi tanks scrambled to turn tail and escape through the pass. Our tanks followed in hot pursuit, as the Iraqis zigged, zagged, and generally fled in a panic. My mental soundtrack changed from Wagner to the theme from Benny Hill. Then it was time for us to go to work. Throck was on the hooks. Fire mission! Battery, 5 rounds! DPICM with VT fuse! As he yelled out the fuse settings, powder charge, elevation, and deflection, we all went to work. I set my fuses and screwed them to the projectiles that would unleash dozens of anti-tank and anti-personnel bomblets over the target. Ayler and Bordelon cranked their wheels to aim the barrel. Cherry and Lelux cut the powder bags. Simpson stood by as the recorder and to jump in to fill a roll if any of us were struck down. I heaved the first 102-pound round into the loading tray while Eamon grabbed the other side. We slung the tray up to the breech while Shapiro rammed it home. I spun out of the way to get the next round as Gibby shoved the powder in behind the shell, closed the breech, primed it, and readied it for the command from Throck. Stand by, fire! No time to get my fingers in my ears as we ran through the process 4 more times in less than a minute, giving those fleeing Iraqi tanks a nasty surprise as they thought they escaped to the other side of the pass. We had done it. I could see the difference in the Wild Turkey Express. We were no longer the untested Marine reservists from Richmond. We were combat veterans, by God. Strutting around the position, slapping each other on the back, grinning like fools, we were unstoppable now. I enlisted at 17 and chose the Marine Corps because I was betting on the chance to see combat. My bet was paying off, and we were part of the mother of all ass whippings. We stayed in that position throughout the afternoon, firing several more fire missions. At one point, the mission was a battery fire for effect, HE, high explosive, and Willie Pete white phosphorus smoke rounds at troops in the open. I couldn't imagine the hell on earth that those poor sons of bitches were feeling. By dusk, a pall of smoke and the glow of flames lay on the horizon. During a lull in the action, I took a few minutes to cram an MRE in my mouth. The constant action of the day had overcome my hunger. First Sergeant Parker came into our guns area. Any one of us would have followed that man into hell. The epitome of a Marine. He was a natural leader. He gathered us around. You men doing okay? Roger that, First Sergeant, came a chorus of responses. You have chow? Plenty of water? Keeping your weapons clean? We're all doing great, First Sergeant, Throck replied for the section. Where do we go next? Parker gazed north toward the smoke and fires. There. He came to each of us to shake our hands or slap us on the backs before he moved off to Gun 6. He left us feeling motivated, but with a sense of unease about what the next battle might bring. We were still near the border and between the minefield belts. We hadn't even cleared the second breach yet. The temperature dropped with the sun. The MOPP suit was too thick to get a field jacket on over it. A detached observer might have thought we were a homeless encampment with poncho liners draped over our shoulders, stamping our feet and blowing in our hands to ward off the chill. Our outer clothing was a visual cacophony of muted patterns with woodland MOPP suits, desert flak jacket covers, and digital night camo parkas. The best equipped military force in history, and they couldn't even get us a matched set of duds. Despite the cold and the extra layers, we still could pump rounds downrange. Throughout the night, I kept the illumination rounds ready, and Gibby sent them skyward to light up the battlefield for infantry contact and forward observers. As midnight approached, we had been going for over 20 straight hours. Throt got off the hooks and called us to the breech of the gun. Okay, we're going down to 50% on watch, Gibby, Borderline, Cherry, Eamon, and Green. Find a place to bed down for a couple of hours. Don't go beyond the cab of the truck, and don't waste time with sleeping bags or any of that crap. The rest of us will take first watch, and if nothing happens, we'll swap off at 0200. Great job today, men. You've done me proud. Semper Fi. I draped my poncho over my stacked projectiles to use it as a windbreak. I rolled up in my poncho liner and squirmed down into the sand, trying to get a little bit of comfort. I was a combat veteran. Sleep took over.
That was G-Day, written by my old friend who I used to babysit, Donald Green, whose father is arguably one of the most important figures in my personal life. Your dad helped raise me, and I thank you for being his son, and I thank Gary now for everybody to hear. Donald Green, what was it like on the eve of war? Because we get a lot of stories about warfare, but this was the night before. How old were you in this story?
21, 22.
Okay, 21, 22. And you're given a lot of responsibility, far from home, wearing a suit in case Saddam has chemical weapons, a lot of stuff for a young man. But there you are, the night before. As you say in the story, still unvetted, still unblooded, haven't fired a weapon in combat yet. But there you are. What was it like on the eve?
There's a lot of unknowing and questioning ourselves, questioning myself, if I would be ready, if I would prove myself. A month and a half before this, I was a VCU student going about life with not a care in the world till our reserve unit got activated and shipped overseas and plunked down in the desert.
You described the faces of your squad. You gave me three choices. You said they were fear, excitement, or blank. Which one were you?
I like to think I was excited, but
you were blank. You know,
I was probably blank or terrified.
Terrified. That was the fourth category. You didn't put that one in there. But you joined the Marine Corps Reserve to get the chance to be in combat.
Yeah.
So there you were. It was given to you. It was handed to you. I mean, was it one of those watch what you wish for, you might get it moments?
I think so. I felt it was my destiny. My family throughout centuries has served when needed. Nobody made a career out of the military, but we all went when needed. When I went in, it was needed for me, I think. It's fortunate that I was able to do what I did, to see the elephant, as they say, and to prove myself. It was a challenge that I had to myself that I don't know that I would have met in any other fashion.
Now, what is the elephant?
I think it came to use in America during the Civil War and referred back to Hannibal crossing the Alps.
Okay. Now, let's describe this gigantic mechanized movement that the United States brought to the border with Kuwait. In your own description, there's Apache helicopters, which are fearsome things to see. There are Cobras, which are more fearsome things to see. There's giant bulldozers plowing through minefields, howitzers towed behind trucks like your own, tanks, massive mechanized might, stink of diesel, the roar of propellers all around you. You get up in the front seat, right on the edge, like a Titanic moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
King of the world. Take me to that moment. Give me that one.
There wasn't any hair to have the wind through, but the wind crossed my face, and the sights and the smells and the sounds were overwhelming and awe-inspiring, but they filled me with pride and excitement and anticipation. And just knowing that there was like 500,000 Americans in that theater of operations at that time. I don't know how many were massing on the border, but it was just as far as the eye could see, American might and muscle and fierceness.
And at 22, could you even have envisioned this? You couldn't have met the moment, because I don't know any 22-year-old who could have imagined that moment. It's like D-Day.
Yeah.
You can't look forward to it because you can't possibly encompass that scale.
And there was nothing like it in the history books for us to refer back to. At that time, I was a child when Vietnam was ending. I got, a little bit of Grenada was when I was in high school, but nothing could possibly compare to that vision of a land invasion that large and that massive.
So I assume that image is still very ingrained in your head, right?
Yeah.
You can close your eyes and see it.
hmm
That change you in any way, that moment?
I think it just reinforced, since I'd been 17 and enlisted, it just reinforced why I'd done it, why I was there.
Okay. Now I want to flip that coin over.
Okay.
In the story, you describe scenes of devastation among the Iraqis, burnt tanks, charred bodies. That's the other side of the coin of war.
hmm
Compare and contrast for me. Were you like, screw them, it's war? Or were you like, oh no?
At that moment in time, they were the enemy and they were who we were there to get. But over 30 some years since then, it's really hit me that they were just like us. They were college students. So one of the groups of POWs that we captured, they surrendered to us. One of them was wearing an American college sweatshirt. There were stories of Iraqis who were going to school in America, went home for summer vacation, and whoops, Saddam invaded, so they got drafted, and they had no choice in the matter. And they were humans, and they were forced to be there. They didn't want it. They weren't there for the challenge of their young lives like many of us were. I think they were forced to be there by a tyrannical government. And
Rare, Donald, is the warrior that I encounter who, after years, doesn't become conflicted about it,
mhm.
doesn't leave behind that us versus them ethos and become, it's kind of all one world. We're all flesh and blood. And how tragic to be put in these positions by politicians, let's say,
Yeah.
where young men and women have to do this to each other. And then you're so opposed, and then years go by and we find out how linked we all are,
Mhm.
but by essentially our humanity, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of why we do these stories, yeah? All right, not to get too maudlin, let's go back to the fun part of war. Yay,
Okay.
big gun, big gun.
hmm
And you're slamming that 102-pound round in there. And the first time it goes off, these shells fired at living human beings, which is your job. Was that a pinnacle moment when you pulled that string and you went, I just engaged in combat?
Yeah, it's a team effort. There's no way one person could run an artillery piece. It was truly a crew-served weapon. But we all functioned like cogs in a machine, and well-oiled cogs at that. We knew exactly what our role was. We had had that howitzer since 1989, so 2.5, 3 years at that point. And everything had been building up to that one moment, that one split second where that lanyard got pulled, primer got impacted, the powder got ignited, and the projectile flew. The end result that the projectile flew, we don't know what happened at the end of it. We might have done tremendous damage. It might have exploded harmlessly in the middle of the desert, but it was our job to send it, and it just reinforced everything we had done for the last 2.5 years on that piece of equipment.
What's the sound and feel of a gun that big up close?
You feel it more than hear it, I think.
Huh.
The concussion of the rails of the howitzer sliding back in recoil, it pushes air against it, and you feel that. You feel the concussive blast coming out of the muzzle brake at the end of the tube. And obviously you do hear it. That's why I took my hearing aids out before I put these headphones on, because it's one of the loudest things I've ever heard.
Here's a toughie. You described it as the mother of all ass whippings. That was, by and large, the American experience of the Kuwaiti invasion. You ever talk to Vietnam vets about their war and themselves as warriors? They can have a tendency to compare,
Mhm.
and the comparison isn't often flattering to your generation of warrior. You had this experience?
I have, and I've brought it upon myself more so than from the outside toward me. At the VFW or different organizations I've been a part of. In my experience, they've all been appreciative of what we did. It's a brotherhood. They support us. But in my mind, I was off in a little summer camp jaunt compared to what those guys did. We had combat for 9,600 hours, and we checked all the boxes in that 100 hours, but those guys for months and months, or sometimes multiple years, with no clear destination in sight, is a lot of it, and just the constant in battle, out of battle, in battle, out of battle. Ours was quick, and I hesitate to say easy because Even in my reserve unit, we lost a man, and we had another one wounded in combat. But I think we had it a lot easier than what those who went before us did, and to even a greater extent, those who went after us.
And the homecoming, very different,
Yeah, very different.
but combat the same.
Mm-hmm.
Because you refer to it as a brotherhood. And every time I have a Marine sitting across from me, I ask this question. Donald Green, how much of you, sitting here right now, how much of you is a Marine? How much of you is the Donald Green that I've known since you were a child? Because a Marine changes you, right? You're a Marine. Walk me through that.
Marine for life. Obviously, tell by looking at me, my Marine edge has tempered over the years, but it's still there.
I just always contribute that to the fact that you're your father's son, because that man's edge. There's because you said brotherhood. And as soon as I hear the word brotherhood, I think that you end up extending that almost to your enemies, because they're in the same field you're in, the same desert landscape. Looking back on that as a combat vet, do you have a sense of oneness with warriors everywhere, or is it American warrior?
I think it's with warriors everywhere. Yeah, I've met former Soviet soldiers after the Soviet Union fell, but perhaps we were in the same area at some point. I've met some other foreign soldiers and warriors, and there's always a sense of something in common. And even there's a whole lot of inter-service rivalry among U.S. troops of all the different branches. And, it extends, obviously I think America's better than the other countries, but they think they're better than us. And but there's definitely a connection.
Last question. Why did you name your gun the Wild Turkey Express?
It's a mighty tasty drink, David. It's tradition to name your piece, and our group, bunch of hill folk from Hanover County, we said, well, we like wild turkey. Let's go ahead and pay a little tribute.
See, so it wasn't the Glenlivet. It wasn't.
No, nothing fancy.
Nothing.
We didn't hold our pinkies out.
Was it? It didn't come in a blue velvet bag. No. With Crown Royal Express. That doesn't make it.
Doesn't have the same touch to it.
Donald, thank you so much. It's great to see you, my friend.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
Yeah, brother, you be well.
Thank you.
Now our second story, Going Home, read by Harry Kollatz. Afterward, I'll speak with author Charlie Williamson.
The Iraqi summer had not been good to us in 2016. ISIS had caught much of the military off guard and were making astonishing gains in both Syria and Iraq. Mosul had been in the hands of ISIS for about 2 years, and after all the work it had taken to seize the city the first time, the Joint Chiefs were getting anxious to take it back again. Given how seemingly outclassed the Iraqi military was by comparison to the militants, it became obvious that this would be a problem for the United States. Needless to say, it was a busy summer for the reconnaissance section. When command first assembled the recon section, there were 12 of us, drawn from the battalion fresh out of whatever training section the Army had allotted for us. Infantry school, combat medic, airborne school, Pathfinder, and the no-selects from the Special Forces Q Course and Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. We formed an interesting band of vagrants and castaways, to say the least. We arrived in Iraq in March 2016 in relative high spirits. It was the first time we had been to Iraq for all of us but one, Hamza Dar, our radio man, affectionately called Skips by Recon Section. Skips had immigrated with his parents to America in late 2002 when he was 9 years old, in advance of what was to come when the U.S. coalition rolled through Iraq a few months later. No one knew how his family had managed to get into the United States, but they left behind everything to start over, including Skip's older brother, who was in the Iraqi army, and his two uncles who didn't want to leave home. Home was on the outskirts of the city of Masad, west of Mosul, now territory in the hands of ISIS militants. Skips joined the army in part to pay his dues to the country that had taken his family in. He also hated ISIS more than any man I had ever met, and had surprisingly strong memories of the terrain from his home country, so he fit right in. When Skips left, He never thought he would see his home again, let alone what was left of his family. Last he heard, his brother had died during the invasion fighting the American invaders and was buried on a plot of land near what was left of his house. The rest of his extended family had fled out of the country or were feared to have not survived the occupation. Well, he was a few hours' drive away from his old haunts from childhood. It was obvious that Skips was distraught at this prospect of being so close to home, and yet having it remain just out of his reach. At first, it was obviously a fool's errand, and he knew it. The city was miles behind known territory, controlled by militants, and there was probably little of his home left after the coalition's war and years of civil unrest that plagued Iraq since Saddam was ousted. We were a dozen men at most. It would be a messy affair to go out and fight in the open with the militants and not what we were equipped to do. Eventually, Mosul and the surrounding area would be brought back under the control of the Iraqi government, but it was obvious that Mosul, with a population of over 1 million citizens, were the priority. Mossad would have to wait. The wait ended abruptly on a particularly miserable afternoon in June. The section and I had just returned from 12 weeks outside the wire, looking more like ghosts than people. 2 weeks of sifting through the dirt and ruins of civilization long gone, with names no one had heard outside the Bible or a history textbook will do that. It was exhausting work under ideal conditions, and the Iraqi summer was in no mood to be kind to us. We were tired, hungry, and had enough sand in our boots, bags, and gear to fill a regulation-sized beach volleyball court. We had the rest of the day to recover. Then tomorrow morning, the colonel wanted our report. Prior to this assignment, our battalion commander had been living the high life of luxury before bad luck on his part saddled him with us. He was a West Point graduate, and his first taste of leadership experience was running combat operations for the 75th Ranger Regiment during the famous Black Hawk Down incident in Somalia. He was running his own section office as a major back in regiment till he fell out of graces with his higher-ups and was sent back to Big Army, as they called it. He went from being a man no one in regiment wanted to being our commander for reasons to this day unknown. As such, his arrival to non-special operations line infantry with gravel agitators like us was one he particularly abhorred. It was a known fact that unless you were from the regiment or had a ranger tab, he didn't have time for you. Recon section he barely tolerated. We were halfway through our report when the colonel lost interest and informed us we were being retasked. Command's directive was to try and encircle ISIS around Mosul to the north near Badouche. He was going to Baghdad tomorrow to iron out the details with the rest of command and staff and would be back in less than a week. We were to shift reconnaissance efforts west of Mosul and have actionable intelligence by the time he got back. How we went about this and accomplished this mission was left to my and the team leader's discretion. To his credit, Skips waited till the rest of the team had broken for recovery before he approached me about it. I know what you're going to say, Skips, and we are not going. Sergeant, don't make me beg. We can be there and done in a few hours. And if we get hit on your jaunt through memory lane, how are we going to get support if things go bad that far behind the line? There is nothing there for you, and you know it. Skips looked gutted, like a man who had suddenly lost everything. At his core, he knew there was nothing for him in the ruins of his old town. No family waiting beyond the door for him to come home like in days gone. The desire to see it one last time still stuck in his mind like a barb in the far reaches of his consciousness. Nothing could relieve, though. Skips was a shrewd soldier and had one trump card in hand he knew he could play. With a wry grin like a demon just released into the material realm, he breathed his reply into physical space. Sergeant, if memory serves, you still owe me one for Mazar-e-Sharif. Mike Tyson in his prime could have time-traveled back to that exact moment and delivered a full-powered haymaker, and it still would have been less devastating than what Skips dropped at my feet. What seemed like a lifetime ago, Skips had pulled me out of the wreckage of what used to be the Humvee I was riding in after an RKG-3 anti-tank grenade blew us off the road. Other than some ringing in my ears that never stopped, I walked away from that thanks to him. Skip's Muslim upbringing frowned sternly on debts, both personal and financial, and although I was indifferent to the cares of his culture and religion, there was unfortunately more at stake. Primarily, I was not about to allow there to be a loss of confidence in me while on mission. Squabbles and things were fine back on Garrison stateside, but under no circumstances could there be a loss of confidence in me while in country, either perceived or actual. Secondly, and more personally, Skips was right. He was my friend and had likely saved my life, no matter how different we were before the military brought us together. My failure to live up to his expectations as his friend and senior would have far-reaching personal consequences. It was a tough spot to be in, but it took all of a second to make up my mind. All right, Skips, fine. You win. Mom didn't raise a quitter. We give the gang 24 hours to rest up, and those that want to go can go. This is off books, and I am not going to order them on this. You and I will go alone if that's what it takes. Skips nodded his approval and walked off, seemingly satisfied. The next day, the section assembled, and I broke the news about what was to come. The choice was simple. Either stay back at base and get another day or two of rest before we had to go back out into open country, or leave with Skips and me for what I called an extracurricular activity. What followed was what an old platoon sergeant of mine had once called a robust discussion about tactics, available support, and why this was even a consideration in the first place. It was about 5 minutes in when the question finally was asked, "So, Sergeant, just to be clear, why are we doing this?" It was a fair question that deserved an answer. I'd been wrestling with it since Skips and I had talked the day before. I owed Skips, not them, and it was a large hesitation to gamble with the section on a personal quest like this. Quick show of hands. Who has had tanks roll through their house? I asked. In 4 months, we get to rotate stateside and go home. Skips is home. In 18 years, this is the closest he's been to being home, and if a brief side op is what it takes to get him some closure on the life he left behind, I'd say it was a worthwhile deployment. It was hardly the rallying call to arms I had hoped for, but it seemed to have the desired effect. After a brief discussion of the best plan of action, the room was unanimous. We were all leaving at dusk the next day. I could have sworn I saw Skips tear up on his way out the door. The great redeeming quality of being in reconnaissance section was the lack of command oversight. Case in point, when we left the next day, no one really gave it any consideration. Of course, that was the easy part. Once we got to Masad, things would get much more difficult, and support, air, artillery, medical, or otherwise, would be a lot harder to explain, especially if the commander got wind of it and wanted to know what we were doing and why. At best, I would be called insubordinate. At worst, I was looking at demotion, or depending how he was feeling, AWOL charges for the entire section. At the end of the day, it was a consequence that didn't bear consideration. Internally, though, I hoped the flimsy shield of him saying the mission plan was up to me would hold if things were to go sideways. The plan was relatively simple. We were heading north to Mosul, going to make a quick detour for Skips, then continue on the route. Chart showed high ground elevation near 2 of the main highways into Mosul with decent elevation over the city itself. We get there in the dead of night, settle in, and radio our position back to battalion, then hold there for reconnaissance for a few days. Any trouble, we pack up and head south unless support arrives. We would ride to near Masad, then walk the rest of the way under cover of night to avoid detection. The ride took the better part of 45 minutes. Skips was silent in the passenger seat the entire time. I could tell from the pained look on his face he was thinking about his older brother. His mind was painting a picture. None of it was pleasant as he dwelled on words he could never speak to a brother he had once admired and who he feared died despising him. As we got close, he finally perked up with some directions. Thankfully, the major landmarks and streets had not changed much since the days of his youth. After some touch-and-go navigation in the dark, Skips indicated we were a half a mile out, and the spot we were looking for was at the top of a hill before us. I had everyone pull over off the main road. We were as close as we were going to get with the vehicles. The infiltration on foot was to be a small affair, just myself, Skips, and the sniper team, since they had one of the night vision rifle scopes. Everyone else was directed to hold position and wait for us to get back. I capped time on the objective at 30 minutes, 10 to travel there and back, and 20 minutes on site. Our luck was holding so far. We had not seen another soul anywhere, and certainly no ISIS militants, but I was in no rush to change that. The walk to our destination was thankfully a short one, but made difficult by steep uphill gradient in the shifting Iraqi sands. As we crested the hill, my fear was realized. Whatever structures had once stood there were long gone, reduced to rubble and splinter, turned bleach white under the hateful gaze of the desert sun an indeterminate amount of time ago. It looked like the remnants of an old neighborhood, or at the very best several buildings that served as part of a larger estate. So complete was its destruction, it was impossible to give its former size or function to any of the former structures. The only thing that remained was a large acacia tree, and what I assumed was at one point a backyard with what looked like an oddly formed rock in the green-black of my night vision near the base of the tree. I gave Skips a nod. The sniper team and I fanned out in the opposite directions to give him space. Skips seemed to handle it well enough. He walked past the rubble, only pausing once as if some long-forgotten treasure in the rubble caught his eye. He worked his way slowly to the acacia tree and stopped in front of it. He then leaned over the rock and placed both his hands on it. Skips stayed there, frozen in time for what seemed like an eternity. I checked the time. We had to be back with the section in 10 minutes. I give the sign to the sniper team, then started walking towards Skips. As I got next to him, I realized what had him so enthralled. The odd-shaped rock near the tree was a headstone. This was where his brother had been buried after he had died in the coalition invasion 15 years ago. As I stood next to him, Skips stood up, walked around the stone, and faced south, placing the headstone between himself and Mecca. He offered a short prayer, then nodded at me, picking up a piece of his old house and putting it in his pocket as we left. Skips didn't say anything on the walk back, but it was obvious he was a changed man. His steps seemed lighter, like he was at peace at last, like the wound in his soul was finally allowed to heal. We arrived back with the rest of the section with 6 minutes to spare to begin heading north. 20 miles to the east, flames engulfed the night sky as Mosul burned.
That was Going Home, read by Harry Kollatz. I have in the studio with me the author of that, my dear friend, Charlie Williamson. Chuck, the first thing I want you to do is describe for me and our audience, what is recon? You did recon in Iraq, you were 10th Mountain, but describe for us the methods and the mission typically of recon.
So generally, reconnaissance is you're kind of the eyes and ears of the command element for a company, or generally, more specifically, battalion level. Whenever like the colonel or whoever wants to know what's behind a hill, that's what you guys get to go do. So it's a lot of eyes on, just being observant, getting positions if they're available. It's a lot of walking and reporting what you see. And only rarely does that actually transition to kinetic or hands-on things. But yeah, it's a lot of walking.
What are the skill sets? I mean, obviously hiding, camo. By the criteria you just gave me, and I'm 6'6" and 70 years old, I could do recon if it was just walking over a hill and taking notes.
So, for lack of a better phrase, and this has been described by other members of the community, so this is not, nobody take this out of context, but it's kind of like you've got to learn a little bit of criminality. You've got to know how to get to places and get out without being seen or observed generally. It's easy for everybody to line up and walk across a field and go to a road and say that there's 5 trucks in the parking lot. it's completely different to have you and however many other guys you've got do that same thing without being seen and then report back what you saw. It's primarily a lot of like your field craft, learning how to use geography to your advantage, light, shadow, all that good stuff, and just being aware of the surroundings and the environment and how that is going to help you remain unobserved. A lot of the skill set with recon is it's not like you have a platoon of guys with you like regular line infantry, and that platoon also has like 240 machine guns and a truck and 20 other friends with you. And there's a forward observer who can call in artillery, a JTAC guy who can get you air support. It's a much smaller unit, and so a lot of it is not necessarily avoiding the fight, but knowing how and when to take your engagement if you have to, or break contact and live to fight another day.
And your particular skill set was you were sniper, distance marksman.
I
Right?
was distance marksman and team lead, so it was a lot of leadership of the element as well as I forget what the official term is now. I think they call it like long range kinetic application, but distance shooting rounds at distance
Long
with
range kinetic application.
that's what we're calling it now. So
Okay.
anybody out there, it's long range kinetic
Yeah.
application now. You heard it here first.
So you were named leader because I suspect you had the highest degree of criminality.
We can go with that. It was a combination of just a lot of folks were moved out to other opportunities, which was good for their career development. I didn't have much of a career to sacrifice to big army. No desire to go be like big platoon sergeant somewhere. My talents were always in like the off-brand kind of stuff with the military. I was not a good drill and ceremony soldier. I just didn't do well with like the pomp and circumstance of standard military living, as I think a lot of people relate to, just that very regimented idea of the military, of just all the formations, and you've got to have your hair cut a certain way and your uniform has to be like just right.
You were that guy in the movies, the rogue, the guy he's always got the beard, he's always smoking, he's always sitting in the corner, he's got that far away look in his eyes.
If you were to try and base my character
Yeah.
on in the military off of anybody, it would be like the rogue guy who's always like, "Oh man, I just want to get back out there, and I don't want to be here." And
So you're
in
the one
garrison."
when people walk in the room, they see you and they say, "Hey, what's up with him?"
No one's ever said that to me directly, but
They
I
said it
like
behind your
to
back.
I like to hope that that's the impression people get
All right.
eventually.
So 12 weeks outside the wire. And this was outside the wire around what I understand to be arguably the second most pivotal and major battle in Iraq after Fallujah was Mosul. 1 million people in Mosul, major battle, and you're on the outskirts of that. So you spent 12 weeks outside the wire. Outside the wire meaning you never came back to base.
So we were back and forth. The 12 weeks kind of all runs together in my head, so I don't remember how much of it was like back and forth. The kind of way that America likes to do conflict, specifically in the Middle East, has been you've got like this focal point of a forward operating base or the green zone or something. You're going there, that's kind of like home away from home. And then you go outside the quote unquote the wire, or you go and into town or do your patrol, whatever, and you come back. So no, it was not 12 weeks consecutively,
Right.
but it was a lot of very high op tempo, like go out, do this stuff, go here, come back, go somewhere else.
Gotcha.
Just a lot of that shuffling that the military does to keep everybody busy.
Skips was your friend. He was your colleague. You were his superior in the unit, and you also owed him kind of a blood debt. He dragged you out of a blown up Humvee. When he came to you and said, "I want to see my home," I love the line in the story when you said, "Well, Mom didn't raise a quitter." Could you have said no? The story is beautifully crafted, Chuck, in a way that everybody who reads and listens to that says yes. So is that Army Chuck or is that Chuck today?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. My mom, she is a just iron lady of the faith, and she did not raise a quitter, I like to think. But everyone kind of has a foreign national like army story. A lot of your military experience is dealing with just other perspectives.
Let's get into the meat of the story, which has at its core the power of Skip's tragedies, that he was an expat from this country, that he was near his home, that he had heard but had not confirmed that his brother died. And in the story, you said he feared that his brother died cursing him. What do you think the likelihood of that was? And how much can you describe being with him when he came home? Because you said, we get to go home. Skip's is home.
So to answer the first part of the question, I think the odds that Skips and his brother hating each other was very low. Those of us with extended family, we know that that's what you do. You get into disagreements, you fight. It takes you an hour or two, and then you're back at it like it never happened, unless it's something really grievous. In this case, they never fought each other directly. It was predominantly an ideological difference, and I think that they both knew that were they able to just like sit down and have a conversation, explain the perspectives, it would have been like it never happened. But unfortunately, those conversations we typically don't get to have with folks we care about, friends, coworkers, adversaries.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, this is a theme that I hear from almost every combat veteran. The man or people that we hurt or killed, had I had a chance to sit with them, maybe those differences would have disappeared. Likely, those differences would have disappeared.
mhm.
And to hear it in the context of Skip's, and your story was particularly powerful. Your descriptions of the house, I found particularly moving. The rubble, the splinters, under the hateful gaze of the sun and time. There's an elegance to your story that revealed your own sentiments. You felt lucky that you weren't Skip's. You sum it all up by saying that leaving, you felt that Skip's had found peace. So transpose yourself. If that had been you, would that have done it for you? Because not me. I would have seen it, and I don't know. I might have been angry.
It all depends, I think. It's a matter of perspective. Home is one of those things that we as people are just deeply ingrained to value. Where do you go when things are going wrong? You go home. Not having home is a catastrophic life circumstance and issue. It's a place we all long to return, whether home is four walls and a roof, a person, we all kind of just gravitate back there. And so I think a lot of it is not to be cliche, but with the journey being the destination, the chance to just go back for even just a moment was all that we really needed for him. To just be out of the circumstances and just to go to a place to put his mind at ease because it was comfortable, familiar, and formerly safe to him.
And in the background, your last line, as Mosul burned, a great metaphor for that whole period of American military history. Chuck, great story. It was a joy to have that story in the class and have you in the class. You're a good friend to me in the Mighty Pen. I thank you. And I know when I thank you, you thank me.
I thank you as well.
My brother. The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America, and you want to learn how to best tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's pieces and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. And if you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen Podcast. It's an honor.